Hello, my name is Dr. Switzer, and today we're going to learn about comparing two or more text at the same time. A few words that we're going to hear throughout this lesson are analyze, which means to look closely, compare, to look at similarities and differences, and contrast, to compare to show differences. Many ask, why do we have to compare text? Well, here's an example. Imagine two different chocolate bars. They both need to satisfy the customer. But one might do it through a cookie center and another through the texture of the chocolate. They have the same purpose, but different ways of achieving it. This is the same with using various texts through English. When comparing text, we need to look at the text's purpose. One way to compare text is through the purpose that they're aiming to achieve. Two different texts may have the same purpose, but achieve it in different ways. They have the same purpose, but a different subject, or have the same subject, but a different purpose. When comparing texts, consider what they have in common and what's different about them. If they have the same purpose, do they use the same techniques? For example, two newspaper articles could use exaggeration to present completely different points of view at the same time. Look at the text and ask, are they aimed at the same kind of audience or different ones? Within two advertisements, the writers will aim to sell their product, but will have a different target audience in mind. Then we look at our text and say, they could have a different purpose, but the same subject. So here are some questions we need to ask. How do they treat it differently, it being the subject? For example, if you're analyzing two newspaper articles about the same event in the news, how does the language show how the writer has aimed the writing for a particular audience? How have the writers shown a different opinion towards the same subject? These are all questions to ask when comparing text. Use the following steps that we're about to discuss to get as much information from the text as possible. 1. Read each text very carefully. Examine times if necessary, several times. Identify the type of text. Is it a magazine article, a letter, a textbook, a diary, a newspaper editorial, an academic essay, or something else completely? Then look, does it identify the text topic? What is it talking about? Also, you can look at identifying the text purpose. Does this text merely entertain you? Does it inform you through sets of facts? And does it try to persuade you to accept a position or perform an action? Some other steps to look at: identify the author's main idea or argument. What is the primary position or main message that the author is presenting about the topic? Another step, identify the reasons and evidence of the author uses to support or explain the main idea. What point does the author use to justify his argument or explain his message? Does he use facts, statistics, stories, examples, excerpts, testimony to support his points? Also, clarify any unknowns about the text. Look up unfamiliar words, research references that are not clear, ask questions about the text, and think critically about whether it's the main idea, reasons, and evidence are clear. Are they connected? Does it make sense? Is it accurate? As you read your first text, go through the 8 steps that we just talked about. Jot down notes in the margins or a separate sheet of paper. Then repeat the process when you look at the second text. All right, so let's practice. The Battle of Gettysburg, which was fought over 3 days on July 1st through the 3rd of 1863, was the turning point of the Civil War that led to ultimate Confederate defeat. First, it was a great victory for the Union Army, the Pontotoc, which had been struggling to gain military success for nearly 2 years. Second, the fight at Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, foiled the Confederate General Robert E. Lee's plans to invade the North. Lee was forced to retreat back into Virginia after the battle. He never again led his army into the North. Third, the Confederate Army suffered over 28,000 casualties, including more than 3,900 killed and over 18,000 wounded. While the Union casualty numbers were nearly as high, the Confederacy lacked the manpower to replace its lost soldiers, and its army continued a steady decline from which it could not recover. Now, what is its topic? Is it talking about the Battle of Gettysburg? What does it say about Gettysburg? Is it trying to persuade readers that Gettysburg was the turning point of the Civil War? What reasons and evidence are offered to support that idea? The author says that Gettysburg was a victory for the Union, foiled the Confederate plan of invasion, and led to a decline in the Confederate Army. The author offers some facts about the battle and statistics about casualties as evidence to support her point. Do we know what the word casualties mean? That's a question you can ask. Then ask yourself some other questions. Does the argument seem clear and logical? Are the reasons and evidence convincing? Why or why not? Congratulations! You've just analyzed a text. Now we're going to analyze and compare facts and fiction. Journey to the Pacific by Rita Hay. In 1804, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark led the first U.S. expedition to the Pacific coast of North America, sent by President Thomas Jefferson to chart a route through unexplored regions of the country. The team of explorers recorded the wide variety of plants, animals, and geography that they saw in the wilderness. The expedition journeyed along rivers, over mountains, and through valleys for over a year, encountering hostile tribes, inclement weather, and challenging terrain. On November 7, 1805, the Corps of Discovery thought they had finally found the Pacific Ocean, but they were mistaken. The wide expanse of open water turned out to be the estuary or mouth of the Columbia River. With the help of native guides and determined companions, however, the team finally succeeded. The expedition reached the Pacific Ocean on November 15, 1805. A long, hard winter and a return journey before them. But the first half of their mission had been accomplished. What characteristics of historical account are present in this passage? So let's take a moment to think. Let's review our historical facts. Meriwether Lewis and William Clark began an expedition to the Pacific coast in 1804. Thomas Jefferson asked them to make the journey. The expedition was called the Corps of Discovery. They mistook the estuary of the Columbia River for the Pacific Ocean on November 7, 1805, and they found the Pacific Ocean on November 15, 1805. Now let's look at a fictional account, Sighting the Pacific by Jace Wright. As the weary explorers reached the top of the hill, Mr. Lewis let out a cry of delight. "We've made it!" he exclaimed. "The Pacific!" The men exchanged doubtful glances. Just last week, Mr. Clark had rejoiced along with the entire team, confident that the large body of water before them was the ocean. Later, they discovered that the water was just the estuary of the Columbia River. Yet they smelled ocean air. Peter had tried to stay positive as they continued their search, but it was extremely difficult. Would today, November 15th, actually be the day they reached the Pacific Ocean? "That certainly is a sight for sore eyes," one of the men exclaimed, and Peter looked up and grinned. After a year and a half of traveling, they had, in fact, come upon the salt waters of the Pacific. Now let's look at some of the fictional details of the story. Take a moment to go back and review the text. So let's review some fictional facts. We got to hear Peter's thoughts and feelings. As a reader, we know what he's thinking and feeling. We know what the other man is saying because he speaks aloud, the words spoken by Lewis and the man, and the men's doubtful glances. We have just compared two texts about the exploration with Lewis and Clark, one with facts and one is fiction. Next, we're going to look at nonfiction comparison and analysis. Global Warming, Why? By Rex Woodbury. Scientists who study climate models and climate patterns are concerned that the Earth's average temperature seems to be increasing. They also report that a warm-up of even a few degrees will have far-reaching effects on climate, wildlife, human food production, and fresh water supplies. Why is this happening? To understand global warming, imagine that our planet is wrapped in a blanket. The blanket is made up of carbon dioxide and other gases that collect and trap the sun's heat in the Earth's atmosphere. It's important to understand that this blanket serves as protection from the intensity of the sun and its dangerous rays. The burning of fossil fuels and other human activities, however, have changed the makeup of this protective covering. In simple terms, by adding more gases, we've added more layers, and the blanket traps more heat than it should. Heat that changes our environment. What is the focus of this passage? Let's look at our first focus. It gives a basic explanation of the main causes of global warming, or why Earth's temperature is increasing. Now let's read the second text and find out what it's focused on. The Side Effects of Warming by Di Garza. Global warming widely impacts both Earth's climate and the environment as a whole. The Arctic regions, in particular, are suffering due to climate change. Glacial ice is melting at an alarming rate. The amount of ice lost in recent years equals the combined area of Alaska, Texas, and Washington. This change to the Arctic landscape endangers many of the creatures living there. Polar bears, for example, depend on glacier ice. It allows them to travel far from land to open water to find their favorite prey, seals. A decrease in the ice limits the bear's ability to reach their prey, thus reducing their change of survival. Only by changing human habits that contribute to climate changes, such as the use of fossil fuels, can we stop the harmful effects of global warming on wildlife. What is the focus of this passage? Let's take a moment to go back over it and review the text. Our second text focuses on Arctic wildlife. Is it at risk because of global warming? Specifically, let's looking at melting of the glacier ice. Now let's compare the first text to the second text. With both texts, global warming is causing far-reaching environmental changes, and human activities cause the global warming. This concludes our lesson today. Remember, ask questions to yourself as you're reading your text. Read it more than once if you need to. Look for the main idea and the text purpose. And if anything doesn't seem right, look for clarifications to help you with your analysis.